Hi, I'm just gonna make like a vlog, I suppose, and kind of organize a few of my um, particular thoughts that I've been putting together recently, um, yeah, as like a human and human experience. So I've decided to end my chapter um, in Da Nang. So I've lived in Da Nang for about 5 months now. And some good things have happened. Yeah. Um, Good things are anh thấy là um, tiếng Việt của anh đã cải thiện. Khi anh sống ở Đà Nẵng, anh có thời gian rảnh để tập tiếng Việt nhiều hơn. Cũng có nhiều cơ hội để gặp nhiều người khác là người Việt để tập nói, hoặc là anh tự tự học nhiều hơn. Thì mình thấy anh đang cải thiện, nghe cải thiện cũng nói cải thiện. So that's been good, and all I'm saying is that like my Vietnamese I feel like is getting better, whatever. So it feels kind of weird, but it also feels kind of cool. It's also not like good enough, but that's like the whatever it means to do an act, or like, prior to working through a challenge that takes a long time, and in the sense of learning Vietnamese, it's been 6 years, right? It's been so long. And then also holding a position that, like, why am I not improving faster than I am? Is there something wrong with me? So I would, and I mean, prior, I think, to where I am psychologically or philosophically at this point, I would always originate or organize my psychological state around a lack, a permanent lack, or a lack that's displaced. I think that's often what most people within the humans deal with, is this, as particularly under capitalist societies and a predatory perspective around the lack that is constituted naturally, or whatever naturally is an assumption, or is a theoretical framework to think about how a person comes into the world, so through a lack. And we can kind of think of the lack as sort of the cut of existence that we sort of somehow are granted accidentally an opportunity of consciousness of an experience, and how we're able to reflect that this is a cut and not something, almost like a destiny in some sense, is as the sort of, in some way, you could say, ideological realism perspective, in which we can recognize that most are, if not all, in some sense, I mean, there is order, but there's chaos. We're passing through something that's not organized for us, and I mean, we are, but rather we are part of something, and that's the frightening, terrifying truth of experiences, that we're traversing through a process of which we are participants rather than producers of. I mean, in the sense that we're not active agents, but we are living through it, and we organize fantasies often, such as gods or whatever it might be, in some sense, to mediate or to control or to process this process a bit easier towards a meaning. And this is when you also go through the research, or you do some readings about liminal reality, or that there are rules to the universe, in some sense, might carry a capacity to hold on to the idea that it's more than just this absolutely terrifying experience, in which systems are, human constructs or social constructs, and that we are not at the and there is no naturalistic in the sense that we can hold capacity to understand experience in its totality, that carries an anxiety from that truth, right? That morals, for example, are not truth factors. They are simply, or even truth in itself is an object of of our our grasping, of our of obtainment. It's simply something of a process. Like life is a verb. Everything is essentially a verb. And through human capacity, then we have the ability to organize a noun or a thing within reality, right? Somehow our mental capacities create the conditions in which I can look at an object like a chair and see a consistency of its form, even if it is a verb, in the sense that it is a shifting and constantly moving object. And so in the same sense that, of course, other relatively conscious entities do not grasp that. All they see is simply, I think, whatever it might be, just object absent of quality, or object, say, color, or they might see surface, or they might see obstruction, or whatever it might be. But we obviously have some capacity to kind of conceptualize this experience in a certain way. But also we can recognize how those conceptualizations can become reified, right? And this is through Lukács. He argued that through abstraction, right? Through social commodity abstraction, we end up solidifying these conceptual realities as truth, meaning makers of experience. And so when we have the idea of value in itself isn't a truth, in that it actually carries anything real. It's simply a comparison or a relationship with another object, of which is attributed another set of values. I mean, there is a truth in its use value, and that it carries a capacity to provide a use for a human being, but it's still an abstraction in the sense of the quantified total of, say, a number in which it represents towards a social relation. Like, say, I can, this is whatever, blah, blah, blah. So, in that sense, yeah, I don't know what I was talking about. All I'm thinking about right now is I'm thinking about what it means to live in this world, and I think that's where my thoughts are right now. Is I've been really reflecting on, like, if the world has become so heavily abstracted, and it has, and this is when we become essentially foreclosed of the future. Foreclosure simply meaning that the future is locked, and it's something like the future is predestined. And in some sense, yeah, we need safety. We need a sense of security about what tomorrow, or what even the next moment, will be. We can't simply live outside of systems or structures that hold together the chaos or the unknown of experience. We need consistency. But in the same sense, we can see how destructive our abstractions or social logics, particularly around commodities or objects of value in social economic exchanges, have ended up impacting our reality, in the sense that, in the personal sense of how we are ordained, or we are attributed quantified numeric values of both use value to society, but also physical value, but also the conflation of those values, right? Of like, oh, my attractiveness in some sense. What could be attractiveness in the physical, or it could be attractiveness in the use value of my labor, my skill set, whatever. But even then, in some sense, it's not necessarily true. That my labor or my skill creates a value for my community. Um, so anyway, of course, it's more like a terrifying feeling that I carry about this experience. So even as an English teacher, I have a lot of anxiety about the, I would say, monetization or the financialization of education, as it's under, the absolute purity of capitalist logic of money producing commodity producing money. Its future goal would be to eradicate the commons or public social interests and commodify all aspects of life, or to objectify all reality. And that would mean also in the sense of me, because like I don't really see myself, and I've also not really enjoyed, I've not enjoyed competition in the direct sense of ordinary life. I've understood competition as a play. It's like a performance or play of actions. But some whatever reason, I don't know, I didn't see labor or contribution as a competitive act. I saw contribution, say working towards a job or a career in contribution, as a act outside of the sphere of competition. It was a act of social good. I mean, maybe I would draw comparison, but comparison in the competitive sense wouldn't be constructed as a primary organizer of why I would participate in contribution. So I never understood the idea that competition was essentially and fundamental to what labor or what contribution is. So I am, anyways, moving into teaching. Then I came into the paradox. So once I realized, like, oh, I don't really like this market dynamic. It's really toxic. Not only that, but just even closures and capitalist expansions into global nation state forms. Anyways, so yeah. Anyways, yeah, I became really anxious about it. So as a teacher, I just found it like, well, what am I? Particularly in the English field, is if it's once I've started to realize that most of these English schools are even require under the tenets of market competition under neoliberal capitalism, and market reform, even in developing or middle tier countries like Vietnam, is that all aspects of education require commodification and efficiency and predictable outcomes to appease shareholder interests. And so it somehow feels like there's all of this conflation of, personal interest or desire toward the craft or whatever, the act of teaching, that's kind of getting lost in the financialization of it. And I'm trying to unravel it, as even advice would say that as a teacher, like, you can acknowledge the systems, inhumane systems that are organizing our public goods, such as education, towards a toxic relationship that disavows interdependency and prioritizes self-interested individualism and competition. And you can step away from that dynamic and teach for the craft of it. And what confuses me is that, like, when I was teaching in this new job, I think psychologically I was pressing back. Like, I couldn't disassemble or unpack quickly enough what was happening when it came to critique of my craft as a teacher, or critique of my practice towards the truth that is of the craft itself rather than the financialization of it. And I got really angry sometimes, so I was really confused about what I was actually doing. Was I teaching, or was I selling a product again? And I still do, and I have some more work to do when it comes to how I prioritize. Like, if I do want to be a teacher and I can recognize how I can teach well, I can prioritize how I allow, or how I include my work into my day, instead of resistance. So I would often sort of subconsciously, I suppose, or maybe even consciously, resist contribution, or excessive contribution towards teaching. And this is often through conversation with other people. We would often talk about teaching as, the vocation of self-sacrifice. And this is also something that I completely resent about the social good. And it might have to be, and it was probably also partially linked to capitalist logic, is that in order to meet the demands of the marketplace, and that might be laborers and that might be participants, is to restructure the attributes of the teacher, of the vocation of teaching, into a self-sacrificial act in order to maintain the requirements of producing a labor force that reproduces the logic of the system. And it's kind of toxic in that sense. So I'm trying to step back from that. So there's a lot of, I'm overthinking, but in another way, I'm also like, well, what am I doing as a teacher? I do care about myself, but then there is a limit in some sense to how much time, and time is energy, and time is life force, about how much time before death I am going to contribute to others. But then this goes back to, again, the idea of interdependency. Like, one of the failures of Western philosophy and subjecthood and, person making was the misunderstanding of what reality was in regard to the individual and community. And once again, I deeply believe and understand that we do not get that people are actually, they are not self-interested individuals, but rather interdependent beings, requiring each other, and respecting each other. So we understood at one point that human beings were self-interested, competitive, individual evolutionary creatures, whereby some are superior and some are not. That deeply connects to capitalist logic of class separation and distinctions that place certain bodies as high value and respectable, and other bodies as disposable and deplorable, useless. And so when we recognize how this logic works and how it destroys our capacity for human dignity and compassion, then we can further work towards a better framework in how we see each other in relation to others, and not that the other is deserving because they are poor or because they are disadvantaged, or because they are vulnerable, deserving of suffering, because of their disposability, but rather that I am them and they are me, in the sense that regardless of capacity, we are shaping and are shaped by each other, so much so. And we cannot ignore this factor and recognize how much we need each other and how possible it is to be wounded, as they are, or how vulnerable we actually are. And then when we set the distance, and that's the miscalculation as well, that they are somehow othered or separate from me, is a miscalculation of existence, of what it means to be a person. And so there's a lot of tenets of Western individualism that have turned into hegemonic, naturalized ideas about what a person is or what a person should be, that are misunderstandings of the human condition. And so these are some of the things that I've been thinking about lately. Thank you for listening, and have a good day.